The Arizona sun in the 1870s was not a kind thing. It was a hammer, beating the red earth into fine dust that coated everything. The wind, its partner, never slept. It lifted that dust from the New Mexico border and carried it straight into Red Butte, stinging eyes and filling lungs. This was the town, a handful of wooden buildings clinging to the side of a raw track, put there only because the Cinder and Pike Railroad Company needed a place to weigh ore. The shriek of the metal wheels on the narrow gauge line was the town's morning song and its evening prayer. It was a sound that promised profit for some and misery for most. Into this dust walked a girl. She might have been 19 years old, or she might have been older. Hunger and hardship had scrubbed the youth from her face, leaving only the hard lines of survival. She carried her life in a bundle of cloth that had once been blue, tied with a piece of old rope. Her dress was faded to the color of the dirt, and her boots were cracked open at the toes. The people of Red Butte, what few there were on the street at this hour, called her no name. It was not a kindness. It was a statement of fact. She had no people, no past they cared to know, and no name she was willing to give. She paused at the edge of the main street, which was just a wide path of trampled dust. Her eyes, gray as a winter sky, scanned everything. The Silver Spur Saloon was already loud, spilling the sounds of rough laughter and a badly tuned piano onto the boardwalk. Across the way, the United States Post Office and ore weighing station sat quiet, its windows blind with grime. Further down, a small wooden chapel stood with its door open, a black-suited man sweeping the threshold. No Name's stomach twisted. It had been 2 days since she had eaten anything but a piece of stale bread given in pity by a wagon driver. Her first task was survival. She needed work. She was good with laundry. She could cook well enough. She could mend tack. She could do whatever was needed to earn a meal and a place to sleep that was not the open ground. Inside her dress, tucked against her skin, she felt the sharp edge of the only thing she owned besides her bundle. It was a piece of stone, maybe turquoise, broken in half. The amulet was smooth from a lifetime of her thumb rubbing it, searching for a memory that would not come. It was a piece of a past she could not grasp, a fracture. She pulled her thin shawl tighter, though the air was hot. The wind was dry, stealing the moisture from her skin. She looked at the saloon again. Work was sometimes found there, but it was the wrong kind of work, and it always cost more than it paid. She looked away, toward the general store. May Tran's Mercantile was the cleanest building in Red Butte. Its windows were washed, and the sign above the door was painted in neat black letters. May Tran herself stood just inside, a small, bird-like woman with sharp black eyes that missed nothing. She was a woman of mixed blood, part Asian, part something else, and she survived in this town through pure, unyielding practicality. She sold everything from flour and beans to bullets and picks. May watched the girl no name. She saw the hunger, but she also saw the straightness of her back. May Tran respected straight backs. A shadow fell across the street. Sheriff Brogan stepped out of the saloon, buttoning his vest over a stomach that spoke of good dinners. He was a big man, and the silver star on his chest was pinned to a corrupt heart. He was a railroad man. First and last, the law in Red Butte was whatever Sheriff Brogan and the Cinder and Pike Company decided it was. He glanced at No Name, his eyes lingering for a moment with a look that made her skin crawl, before he dismissed her as less than nothing. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust and laughed at something one of the railroad surveyors yelled from the saloon porch. The man sweeping the chapel steps paused. Reverend Cole was a thin man, with a face full of worry and a conscience that was a heavy burden in a town like this. He saw the girl, too. He saw her exhaustion and her desperation. He wanted to help, but he knew the limits of his power. The law was broken, and public opinion was even harsher. The settlers in this town were afraid. They were afraid of the drought, afraid of the railroad, and most of all, afraid of the Dinan, the people, whose land this had been for generations. Reverend Cole nodded to her, a small gesture of humanity. No Name did not nod back. She could not afford to trust a gesture. Trust was a luxury, like a full meal. Miles away, on a high mesa overlooking the valley, Ashki Nez watched the smoke rise from the chimney of the mercantile. He sat his horse with the easy grace of a man who was more at home on its back than on his own feet. He was Dine, a warrior who had seen too much and a scout for his family's herd of horses. He had the high cheekbones and strong jaw of his ancestors, and his eyes, dark and piercing, saw the new stakes the cinder and pike surveyors had hammered into the earth that morning. They were closer than ever to the valley, closer than ever to Blue Spring. Ashki's hand tightened on the reins. Blue Spring was the life of his people. It was the hidden water, the place where the earth gave up its most precious gift. In a land defined by dryness, the spring was everything. It was faith, it was survival, it was the future. He had a past shadowed by loss. He remembered the last great drought, the one that had taken his younger brother. He remembered the weakness, the thirst, the silence as the land died. He had sworn then to protect what was left. His goal was simple: to keep his family safe, to guard their grazing lands, and to ensure the water of Blue Spring flowed for the people, not for a steam engine. He knew about the rumors. The railroad wanted the spring to feed its iron horses. The settlers in Red Butte were being stirred up, told that the Diné were the source of all their troubles. He had seen the strange men riding near the borders of their land, men who did not look like prospectors or cowboys. They were gunmen, hired men, and they brought the smell of death with them. Ashki turned his horse's head, the animal responding to the slight shift in his weight. He needed to get back to the Hogan, to speak with Shadi. Shadi was his mother's older cousin, the matriarch who held their family together with wisdom and a will as strong as the ancient stone of the mesas. She was the anchor in their world. She would know what to do about the surveyors. She would know how to meet this new threat. He moved silently, a shadow gliding over the red rock, his heart heavy with the burden of what was to come. Back in Red Butte, the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The dry wind picked up, howling down the single street like a mourning woman. The red dust, that ever-present symbol of the land's unforgiving nature, swirled in thick clouds. It got into everything, a constant reminder of the prejudice and hardship that surrounded them all. No Name pulled her bundle closer. She had to make a choice: the chapel, the mercantile, or the saloon's kitchen. She took a step toward the mercantile. Her mind set. She would ask Matran for work. She would scrub floors, wash windows, anything. She was a survivor. She had lived this long without a name, without a family. She had this broken amulet and a will that would not shatter. This was a place of loose laws and hard judgments, a place where a girl with no name was a target. But it was also a place with water. Somewhere, a place with a chance. The story was set. The pieces were on the board. The orphan girl, the Dine warrior, the corrupt sheriff, the practical shopkeeper, the worried preacher, and the unseen railroad company that wanted to drink the desert dry. In the space between the high mesa and the dusty town, a fight was brewing. It was a fight for water, for land, for justice, and for two lonely souls. It might be a fight for something even more rare in this part of the country, a place to belong. No Name took a deep breath, the grit coating her tongue. She walked toward Matran's store, her shadow long and thin in the dying light. Market day in Red Butte was less a celebration of commerce and more an armed truce. It was the one day of the week the Cinder and Pike Company paid its men in scrip, which could only be spent at the company-owned saloon or Matran's mercantile. And May, in turn, allowed the local Dine and a few desperate settlers to set up blankets and wagons to trade for what she had. The air was thicker than usual, heavy with the smell of horse manure, cheap whiskey, and the sharp, mineral scent of the Dine traders' wool blankets. No Name had spent the morning earning a handful of beans and a strip of dried jerky by sweeping the boardwalk for Matran. The job was done. She was standing by the corner of the mercantile, chewing the tough jerky. making it last. When the noise of the street changed, it went from a dull roar to a sharp spike of screams. A heavy ore cart, left improperly braked on the slight incline by the weighing station, had broken loose. Its thick wooden wheels rumbled over the hard-packed earth, gathering speed, aimed directly at the center of the trading square. Most people scattered, but a small dying child, no more than 4 years old, stood mesmerized by the approaching weight, a half-eaten piece of fried bread in his hand. No Name did not think. She did not weigh the consequences. Her body moved, driven by a raw instinct that had kept her alive for 19 years. She covered the 10 feet in 3 long strides, her own hunger forgotten. She did not grab the child. She launched herself at him, a low, hard tackle that sent them both flying sideways, skidding through the red dust and filth of the street. The cart thundered past the spot where the child had stood, smashing a wooden water trough into splinters before finally crashing into the side of the post office. There was a half-second of total silence. Then the child, safe in the circle of her arms, let out a terrified wail. No Name's ears were ringing. Her hip and shoulder ached where she had hit the ground. She pushed herself up, her first thought to check the boy. He was dusty and crying, but his limbs were whole. Before she could even stand, a heavy boot kicked her in the ribs. "Thievin' little coyote," a voice snarled. 3 men in the stained red shirts of the Cinder and Pike Railroad crew surrounded her. They were big, flushed with midday whiskey from the saloon. One of them, a man with a broken nose, hauled her to her feet by the front of her dress. Her broken amulet, hanging on its leather cord, swung free. "What'd you take from him, girl?" the man spat, his breath hot and foul. "We saw you grab the kid." "She was trying to snatch his food," another one yelled, pointing at the fried bread now trampled in the dust. "Or maybe his mother's purse." "I did not," No Name said, her voice raspy from the dust. "The cart, I saved him." "Liar," the first man said, and he shook her hard. "Empty your pockets, or maybe we just take you back to camp and teach you a lesson about thieving from good, hard-working men." The crowd formed a tight circle, their face hard and accusing. In Red Butte, an accusation was as good as a conviction, especially against a girl with no name. A shadow fell over them. It was long and solid, and it had the shape of a man on a horse. Ashki Nez had been watching the market from the moment he arrived, his eyes cataloging every face, every transaction, every potential source of trouble. He had seen the cart, seen her heroic, foolish dash. Now he walked his horse, a tall, sturdy animal the color of cured tobacco, directly into the circle. The horse's shoulder nudged the broken-nosed man, pushing him back a step. Ashki did not raise his voice. He did not have to. His presence was enough. He looked down at the railroad man, his face calm, his dark eyes holding a stillness that was more intimidating than any rage. "She saved the child," he said. The words were simple, clear, and final. "He is the son of my mother's cousin, you." He nodded at the man holding her. "We'll let her go." The railroad man's face purpled. "You stay out of this, Indian. This is white folks' business. This girl's a thief." "She is not," Ashki said. We all saw." He turned his head slightly, and his gaze swept the crowd. "Did she steal?" No one spoke. They had all seen it, but they also saw the red shirts of the CS&P, and they knew where their wages came from. "That's enough," Sheriff Brogan's voice boomed as he pushed his way through, his hand on the butt of his pistol. He did not look at the railroad men. He looked at Ashki, and then he looked at No Name. His eyes were cold and practical. "Ashki, take your cousin's boy and get on. This ain't your concern." He turned to No Name. "You, girl, you are under arrest. Vagrancy and disturbing the peace." "She did nothing," a sharp voice cut through the air. May Tran stepped off her porch, wiping her hands on a clean white apron. "She did nothing but save that boy, Sheriff Brogan, And she was not a vagrant. She was working for me. I saw the entire thing from my window. Those men. She pointed a thin finger at the railroad crew. Were the ones disturbing the peace. Their cart almost killed that child. Sheriff Brogan's face tightened. He could ignore Ashki. He could arrest No Name. But arguing with May Tran was bad for business. She held the town's credit. Before he could answer, another voice joined. Mrs. Tran is correct. Sheriff. Reverend Cole stepped out of the chapel, his Bible in his hand. I was standing right here. It was an act of God the girl was there to save him, an act of pure Christian charity. The crowd mumbled. A rescue was one thing, but Christian charity was another. It put a different light on things. Brogan was trapped, and he knew it. He looked from May to the Reverend, his jaw working. But the final straw came from a woman who stepped out from behind Ashki's horse. She was older, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her hair bound in a traditional dine wrap. It was Shadi. She held the whimpering child's hand. She looked at No Name, a long, assessing gaze that stripped her bare. Then she looked at Sheriff Brogan. She did not say a word. She simply stood, her presence a powerful claim on the child, on the truth. Brogan spat into the dust. Fine. He jabbed a thick finger at No Name. Fine. But you! He snarled at her. You cause one more ripple in this town. You are in a cell for a month. You understand me. He stalked away, his authority bruised. The railroad men, suddenly sober, grumbled and faded back toward the saloon. The show was over. The crowd broke apart. People suddenly remembering their business. No Name was left standing in the center of the circle, shaking. Her hip throbbed, and her ribs felt like they were on fire. Shadi approached her. Ashki dismounted, his movements fluid, and stood beside the older woman. You are hurt, Shadi said. It was not a question. She looked at the girl's hands, raw and scraped. You are No Name. The girl just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. You brought this one. Shadi touched the boy's head. Back to us. She reached into a pouch at her waist and held out a small, dried bundle of herbs. This is for the pain. Come to our hogan, by the twin rocks where the canyon mouth opens. Bring cloth, the kind for bandages. She looked at May Tran, who had come closer. She will give it to you. We will trade. For food. Shadi turned, took the child's hand, and walked away. Ashki lingered for a second. His eyes met No Name's again. In the swirling dust, she saw it clearly. A loneliness so deep it looked like his. He saw his own pain mirrored in her. He saw a soul that had been fractured, just like his. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and led his horse, following Shadi. May Tran sighed. Well, girl, you've done it now. She went back into her store and came out with a roll of clean muslin. Here, on credit, you'll work it off. No Name took the cloth, her mind reeling. Her goal had been simple food, a place to sleep. Now it was something else. She had been invited. She had a place to go. She wanted to repay the kindness. She wanted to understand the look in that man's eyes. She walked out of Red Butte, following the faint trail Shadi had pointed to. The twin rocks were clear in the distance, 2 stone fingers pointing to the sky. The walk was long, but she barely felt the ache in her ribs. The hogan was not one, but a small cluster of them, round and built of earth and logs, fitting into the land as if they had grown there. Smoke rose from the center hole of the largest one. Shadi was waiting, stirring a pot over an open fire. She was given a bowl of stew, thick with green corn and mutton. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. It was hot and real, and it chased the cold fear from her bones. She ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. Shadi sat with her, not asking questions, but simply talking. She spoke of the land, of the water, and of Hos-Ho. It is balance, Shadi explained, her voice like the warm wind. The world wishes to be in harmony. The cart was out of balance. The child was in danger. You. She looked at No Name. Put yourself in the way to restore it. That is a great thing. No Name had never heard anyone speak like this. She had only known survival, taking what you could, running from what you could not fight. Harmony was a foreign word. As the sun began to set, painting the mesas in shades of fire, Ashki returned. He had been checking the horse herd. He sat on the other side of the fire, cleaning a rifle, saying nothing. But she felt his presence, a quiet weight that was both comforting and unsettling. Miles away, on a high ridge overlooking the entire valley, a man named Ephraim Pike lowered a polished brass telescope. He was a man who wore a dark suit and a starched collar. Even in the desert, he looked nothing like the rough men he employed. The surveyors have marked the spring, sir. His foreman, Jory Hale, said, right where you said it would be. Of course it is, Pike said softly. Water follows a logic, as does business. He focused the telescope again, this time on the town of Red Butte. Brogan is a useful fool, but he is still a fool. There was some trouble in town. Hale offered a girl, a little orphan scrap, caused a fuss with some of our men. But the Indian lover stepped in. Pike adjusted the focus. He could just make out the smoke from Shotty's fire. The girl, he said, a note of interest in his voice. The one they call No Name, the one who saved the dying child. Yes, sir, that's the one. A girl with no name, Pike mused. A thin smile touching his lips. No family, no one to miss her. A girl the Dines seemed to trust. Interesting. Keep an eye on her. Jory, a person with no loyalties, can be a very powerful tool, or a very easy mess to clean up. As dusk turned to night, No Name walked back toward Red Butte. Her bundle was heavier now, filled with stew and fresh-baked bread. Her body ached, but her heart was full of a strange, new warmth. She was no longer just a survivor. She had a debt to pay. She wanted to stand on the right side, even if she did not know where that side was, even if she did not belong anywhere. She paused on the trail, looking out at the vast, dark land. She could not see the blue spring, but she knew it was out there. She imagined it, hidden in the shadows, gleaming under the stars. It felt like a secret, a watchful eye in the darkness, a wolf's eye. She reached into her dress and her fingers found the broken amulet. She held it tight, its sharp edges biting into her palm, a familiar, broken comfort. The trail to Blue Spring is not for those with no family. His voice came from the darkness, so close she jumped. Ashki sat on his horse, a deeper shadow in the night. He had followed her, making sure she was safe. She faced him, her chin held high. I am not going to Blue Spring. Red Butte is not for you, either, he said, his voice low. The spring. It is our life. We protect it. I have nowhere else to go, she whispered. The path you are on is dangerous. He was warning her about Brogan, about the railroad, about him. She looked up at the silhouette of him, the man who had seen the loneliness inside her. I will find my own family, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. He held her gaze for a long moment. She could not see his expression in the dark, but she felt the weight of his stare. He seemed to be memorizing her, or perhaps seeing a future he did not want. Then, with a sound so soft it was almost just the wind, he turned his horse and was gone, melting back into the landscape. No Name stood alone, the scent of his wood smoke and the weight of his words all around her. She turned and walked back toward the lights of Red Butte, but her world had changed. Her feet were still on the same dusty path, but her soul was heading for the mountains. The men who came for the fire wore long canvas dusters, the color of dried mud. They were not from Red Butte. They were ghosts, hired by Ephraim Pike in a private meeting, paid in gold eagles, not company scrip. They were the Longcoat Gang, and their specialty was making trouble that looked like it belonged to someone else. Pike's instructions, delivered by his foreman Jory Hale, were precise. He did not want a massacre. He wanted an incident. "Find an isolated hogan," Pike had said, his voice calm, as if ordering supplies. "One that is far from the others. A single old woman, perhaps. Set the fire. Make it look like a message from a rival tribe. The settlers are already afraid. Sheriff Brogan will fan the flames. He will say the Dane are on the warpath, that they are burning their own people to start a conflict." Pike leaned back in his leather chair, the only one of its kind in town. "The army will come to protect the railroad's interests, and in the confusion, with the Dine busy defending themselves, we will secure the water rights to Blue Spring. It is simple psychology." The Longcoats took his money and rode out under a moonless sky. They found their target easily, a small, solitary hogan belonging to an old weaver, a man who liked his solitude. They splashed the kerosene near the door, lit the match, and rode away, their long coats flapping in the dark. No Name was sleeping in the storeroom behind May-Tran's mercantile. It was not a bed, but it was a roof. May had offered it after the incident at the market, a trade for sweeping, stocking, and staying quiet. No Name was grateful. For the first time in her life, she was not sleeping on bare ground. She woke up not to a sound, but to a smell. It was oil, thick and heavy, not the clean scent of May's whale oil lamps. This was kerosene, raw and spilled. It was the smell of waste, the smell of purpose. She had smelled it once before, when a drunken ranch hand had threatened to burn a barn with her inside it. Her skin went cold. She sat up, her heart a hard knot in her chest. Then the wind, which had been blowing from the west, suddenly shifted. It came from the east, from the high mesas, and it carried something new, smoke, sharp and biting. She was outside the storeroom door in a second, her boots unlaced. The night air was cool, but the wind was hot and carried the stink of the kerosene. She looked toward the town. It was dark. She looked toward the mesas. A new star was glowing on the horizon. Too low, too yellow. A fire. But the kerosene, the smell was too close. She ran down the alley, her feet silent in the dust. She rounded the corner of the mercantile and saw it. Not on the mesa, but just outside the town, in the cluster of brush and rock that separated Red Butte from the Dine lands. A hogan, the one belonging to the old weaver, was a torch. She did not scream. Her survival instincts were sharper than that. She needed help. She needed noise. She ran for the only thing in town that could wake the dead. The chapel? The door was unlocked. Reverend Cole slept in a small room at the back. She did not bother to wake him. She grabbed the thick rope that hung by the door and pulled. The first clang of the heavy brass bell was a physical blow in the silent night. It was a sound of disaster, a sound of death, a sound of Sundays. She pulled it again, and again. The iron scream of it ripped across Red Butte. Lights flickered on in the saloon. Men shouted. A window opened in the post office. Reverend Cole burst from his room, his nightshirt tucked into his trousers, his eyes wide with terror. "What is it? What has happened?" "Fire!" No Name yelled, her voice raw. She pointed out the door. "Fire at the hogan!" She did not wait for him. She ran back into the street. A few men, railroad workers and a prospector, were stumbling from the saloon. "Fire!" she shouted again, pointing. "Help!" May-Tran was on her boardwalk, a shotgun in one hand and a bucket in the other. "Where?" Old Man Bigay's hogan. The name galvanized them. Bigay was known, a quiet man who traded fine blankets for sugar and coffee. He was harmless. "Brogan!" May yelled toward the sheriff's office. "Get up, you useless lump!" But No Name was already running. She led the pathetic rescue. A girl with no name, a woman with a shotgun, a preacher with his Bible, and 3 drunken railroad men. They ran toward the fire, the bell's echo still ringing in their ears. The hogan was fully engulfed. The heat was a solid wall, pushing them back. The roof was a shower of sparks. "Is he out?" Reverend Cole shouted, his face pale in the firelight. "I do not see him," May yelled back, her eyes scanning the clearing. Then No Name heard it, a cough, thin and desperate, from inside. "He is in there." "It is too late," one of the railroad men said, holding his arm up against the heat. "The roof is going." No Name looked at the structure. The main door was a sheet of flame, but the smaller opening, the one for air, was not yet blocked. Before anyone could stop her, she soaked her thin shawl in the horse trough they had just passed. She wrapped it around her face, got down on her belly, and crawled. "Girl, no!" May screamed. The smoke was a physical thing. It filled her lungs, blinding her, choking her. She crawled, her hands scraping on the hot dirt. She could see the old man, Bigay, huddled in the far corner, his blanket pulled over his head. He was not moving. She reached him, grabbed his arm. He was heavier than he looked. "Come on," she rasped, her voice gone. She pulled. He moaned, but did not help. The sound of the fire was a dragon's roar. A beam cracked overhead. Suddenly, a shadow moved through the smoke beside her. It was Ashki. He had appeared from the other side, from the mesas, as if the fire itself had summoned him. He had no shawl. His face was a mask of soot, but his eyes were clear. He did not speak. He simply lifted the old man as if he were a child, slinging him over one shoulder. He looked at No Name. "Go." She scrambled backward, the air burning her. He followed, his step steady even with his burden. They burst out of the doorway, falling into the dust, just as the entire roof collapsed inward, sending a volcano of sparks and cinders into the night sky. They lay there, panting, the three of them. Old Man Bigay was coughing, but he was alive. There was a ragged cheer from the small group. May Tran rushed forward with a dipper of water. No Name pushed herself up. She was covered in soot, her hands were burned, and her hair was singed, but she was alive. Ashki was already on his feet, watching the fire with a grim, hard face. He knew this was no accident. The sound of a slow, heavy clap made them all turn. Sheriff Brogan stood at the edge of the firelight, his arms crossed. He was not breathing hard. He had not run. He was flanked by two of his deputies. "Quite a show. No Name," he said, his voice oily. "Quite a performance." "Sheriff, she saved him," Reverend Cole said, stepping forward. "We all saw it. It was a miracle." "Oh, I saw it," Brogan said. "I saw her, right at the center of things, just like at the market. Funny, how trouble follows this one." He took a step forward, and one of his deputies handed him something. It was a tin, half empty. Kerosene, found it just over there, in the brush, with her footprints all around it. The small crowd went silent. The crackle of the fire was the only sound. "What are you saying?" May Tran said, her voice dangerously low. "I am saying," Brogan said, pointing a thick finger at No Name, "that this was a setup. She set the fire, a little distraction. Maybe so her Indian friends," he sneered at Ashki, "could sneak into town and slit our throats while we were busy." "That is a lie," No Name said, her voice a painful croak. "Is it?" Brogan smiled. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his vest pocket. "I have had my eye on you since you drifted in. You are a vagrant, a troublemaker, and now an arsonist. This here," he waved the paper, "is a warrant for your arrest, signed and sealed this very morning. Seems I was just waiting for the crime. Boys, take her." The deputies grabbed her arms. She was too exhausted, too stunned to fight. "You cannot," Reverend Cole protested. "This is an injustice." "You stick to your sermons, Reverend." Brogan said, "I will stick to the law." He looked at Ashki. "And you get back to your side of the rocks. You are trespassing." Ashki did not move. His eyes were locked on Brogan, and they held a cold, measured hatred. But Shadi's voice came from the darkness. Ashki, let them. We have our elder. The fire has done its work. This is not our fight. Not yet. Ashki looked at No Name. One last, agonizing look. He saw the betrayal in her eyes, the soot on her face. Then, without a word, he lifted Old Man Bigay and disappeared into the night. Brogan laughed. See, they stick together. He shoved No Name toward the town. Let's go, little fire starter. The cell is cold, but at least it is not on fire. They marched her back, leaving the hogan to burn itself out. Matran and Reverend Cole followed, arguing, but Brogan ignored them. The jail cell door slammed shut with a final, metallic sound that echoed the emptiness in No Name's chest. She was in the cell for 2 days. Matran brought her food, her face a thundercloud of fury. Reverend Cole brought her prayers, his face a mask of worried guilt. On the 3rd morning, the cell door opened. What is this? Brogan's voice was sharp. Matran stood in the doorway of his office. Behind her, silent, stood Ashki. He was holding a piece of splintered wood. You are letting her go, Sheriff, May said. The hell I am, Brogan spat, reaching for his gun. Unless, May said, stepping aside. You want to explain this? Ashki stepped forward and placed the piece of wood on Brogan's desk. It was a plank, clearly from a kerosene crate, burned on one side, but the other side was clear. A black stamp, 3 letters, CPR, Cinder Pike Railroad. My man here, May said, nodding at Ashki, is a tracker. He is not like your clumsy deputies. He did not look where you told him to look. He looked where the men rode. He found their tracks, 3 men wearing long coats. They dropped this when they mounted up. Funny, is it not? I sell plenty of kerosene, but I do not sell this brand. Only the railroad does. Brogan's face was a mixture of white and red. He was caught. He could not arrest the railroad. He could not explain the plank. And, Ashki said, his voice quiet, the tracks led to the Cinder and Pike survey camp, not to the Hogans. Brogan looked from the plank to May to Ashki. He was defeated. He grabbed the keys and threw them at May. Get her out. Get her out of my town. One more wrong move, May, and I will burn your store down myself. You hear me. May caught the keys. I hear you. Sheriff, the whole town will hear this. No Name stumbled out into the bright sunlight, her eyes watering. She was dirty, she was tired, but she was free. She looked at Ashki. He was watching her, his face unreadable, but his eyes were full of a new, fierce understanding. He had not just freed her, he had believed her, he had fought for her. She nodded. It was all she could manage. Thank you. He nodded back. The bond, which had started as a shared glance, was now forged in fire and injustice. The town did not welcome her back. The gossip had already taken root. She was the orphan girl, the one who was saved by the Indian. She was seen walking with him. She was his lover. She was a traitor to her own kind. The women of the town pulled their children inside when she walked by. The men looked at her with either lust or contempt. Reverend Cole found her sweeping May's boardwalk, the only work she could find. My child, he said, his hands twisting together. You have been wronged, but you must find it in your heart to be merciful. This town is a tinderbox. Your anger, their anger, it will consume us all. Do not seek vengeance. No Name stopped sweeping. She leaned on the broom, her knuckles white. She looked at the good, weak man. I do not want vengeance. Reverend, she said, her voice clear and strong. I just want the truth. He had no answer for that. She knew she could not stay in the storeroom. She was a danger to May. The town would not have her. She walked to the edge of the territory, carrying a small bundle of mended cloth for Shadi. The old woman was waiting for her. She took the cloth and gave No Name a small pouch of dried corn. Shadi's eyes were sharp. They fell on the broken amulet, which No Name was clutching at her neck. "Let me see this," Shadi said, holding out a weathered hand. No Name hesitated. It was her only possession, her only link to a past she did not know. But she trusted this woman. She placed the broken stone in her palm. Shadi turned it over, her thumb tracing the carved pattern. A look of deep, ancient memory crossed her face. "I have seen this mark," she whispered, more to herself than to No Name. "A long time ago, a woman, a white woman, was brought to us. She was running. She sought shelter. She was with us for 2 winters. She learned our ways." Shadi looked up, her dark eyes piercing No Name. "She carried a blanket, a gift for her child. It had this stitch, this exact pattern. The woman and her baby girl were lost in a raid by settlers. We never found them. Where did you get this?" "I have always had it," No Name whispered, her world tilting on its axis. "It is all I have ever had." Shadi handed the amulet back, closing the girl's fingers over it. "The past is a heavy burden," she said, "but sometimes it is a map. It tells you where you are from." No Name walked away from the hogan, her mind a whirlwind. She was not just No Name, she was someone. She stood at the fork in the trail. One path led back to the hostile lights of Red Butte. The other led into the dark, unknown territory of the Dine. She could choose neither. Ashki found her there, sitting on a rock, staring at the path. He did not ride up. He simply appeared, a shadow in the twilight. "You are leaving," he said. It was not a question. "No," she said. Her voice surprised him. It was not the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a soldier. She stood up. "I am not leaving. I am staying, right here." He looked confused. "Here, this is nothing. This is the edge." "Exactly," she said. She looked down the trail, the one that led past the burned hogan, the one the Longcoats had used, the one that led toward the hidden pass to Blue Spring. "They want the spring. They will come this way. Brogan watches the town. You," she looked at him, "you watch the mesas. Who watches the path? Who watches the place in between?" A slow understanding dawned on his face. "I cannot stay with May," No Name continued, her voice gaining strength. "I am a danger to her. I cannot stay with you," she added, her face flushing. "I am not Dine, so I will stay here. I will build a shelter. I will work for May in the day. I will trade with Shadi. But I will live here. I will be the guardian of this trail. I will be the eyes." He looked at her, this strange, fierce girl who had no name, who had been burned, arrested, and cast out. And he saw not a victim, but a warrior. She was choosing her ground. She was making her stand. "It will be cold," he said, his voice gruff. "I have been cold before," she said, and she turned her face toward the dark trail. Her shelter was not a home. It was a statement. She built it from scavenged railroad ties, dragged one by one from the cinder and pike waste pile, and flat stones she carried from the creek bed. It was a lean-to, tucked against a sheer rock face that protected it from the worst of the wind. It was on the edge, belonging neither to Red Butte nor to the Dine lands. It was her own. She still worked for May Tran, sweeping and hauling, earning her flour and beans. But she did not sleep in the storeroom. She walked back to her lean-to every evening, a solitary figure in the twilight. The townspeople watched her go. They called her the Indian lover, the crazy girl. The names no longer stung. They were just noise, like the wind. Ashki found her there on the third evening. She was trying to start a fire, but the wood was damp, and the wind kept killing her spark. She was cold and frustrated, near tears. He did not announce himself. He simply squatted beside her, his movements silent. He took the flint and steel from her. He did not strike them. Instead, he produced a simple bow drill, a stick. and a flat piece of dry cottonwood. He began to work the bow, his hands a blur, the stick spinning. In less than a minute, a tiny coal was glowing. He transferred it to a tinder bundle of dried grass and blew gently. A small, clean flame sprang to life. "Your fire is loud," he said, his first words. "It makes too much smoke. It tells everyone where you are. A fire should be quiet, small, hot." That was the beginning of her training. He did not ask. He just arrived, a shadow at dawn or dusk. He taught her the land as if it were a book. He showed her how to read the dirt. "This track is 2 days old," he said, pointing to a faint impression. "The edges are crumbled by the wind." He touched another. "This one is fresh. A coyote. He is limping. See how the left paw digs deeper at the toe." He taught her how to move at night, to use the shadows, to place her feet heel to toe to make no sound. He taught her how to use a rope, how to tie a knot that would hold a horse but could be released with one pull. He made her climb a rock face, using only the small cracks for her hands and feet, until her fingers were raw. "The longcoats will come," he said, his voice flat. "They will not use the trail. They will come from above or from below. You must see like them." She was a hard student. She learned, absorbing everything, her mind sharp and desperate. But she was not just a student. She saw his need too. One evening, Reverend Cole had given her an old, water-stained copy of The Pilgrim's Progress. She could read, barely, enough to make out the words. Ashki sat by her small, clean fire, watching her. "What is the paper?" he asked, pointing at the book. "Words," she said, "from the white man's world." "The paper Brogan had," he said, his eyes distant. "The warrant, and the one May found, the plank. They are all paper, paper with power." No Name looked at him, a sudden, clear understanding passing between them. He was a warrior. He could track, fight, and survive. But in the world of Sheriff Brogan and Cinder and Pike, he was blind. "I can teach you," she said softly. She took a charred stick from the fire. On the flat, pale surface of a stone, she drew a letter. "This is a—" He was proud. He was a Dine man, a provider, a scout. But he was also smart. He saw the weapon she was offering him. He nodded, his face serious. So their exchange began. In the mornings, he taught her how to read the earth. In the evenings, she taught him how to read the paper. She used the back of old shipping labels from May. He learned fast. He struggled with the strange, arbitrary shapes of the letters, just as she had struggled with the bow drill. T, he sounded out one night, his voice low. "Cat. Why is this important?" "Because cat is a word," she said, pointing to the label. "And Cinder and Pike Railroad is words. And Notice of Claim is words. They are traps. I am teaching you how to see the traps." Their fireside lessons became their confessionals. The space around them was quiet, isolated, safe in a way neither of them had ever known. The trust that had been a spark at the market was now a steady coal. He spoke one night, his eyes on the flames, his voice so low she had to lean in. "I had a brother, Hastian. He was small. This was many summers ago, in the great drought. The time of the long walk was over, but the land was broken. The spring was low. The corn died." He stopped. His jaw was tight. "We walked for 3 days to find water. He stopped walking. He just sat down. He was too tired. The land was so quiet. Too quiet. I held him." Ashki's voice broke. Just for a second. He became light. The thirst. It takes everything. When I fight for Blue Spring, I am not fighting for water. I am fighting Hastian. I am fighting that silence. No Name watched him, her own throat tight. She had seen his strength, his silence. Now she saw the raw, gaping wound he carried. She understood his fight. She found her own voice, a whisper in the dark. "I never knew my mother or my father. Shadi, she told me about the blanket, about the woman." She clutched the amulet at her neck. "Before that, I was just nothing. The first man I remember was a rancher. He took me in. I thought he was kind. I mended his clothes. I cooked his food. I was 12. He was good to me for 3 years." She looked away, her gaze going to the dark mouth of the canyon. "Then a trader came through. He needed horses, and his seed bags were low. The rancher, he sold me for 2 horses and a bag of seed. I was not a person. I was a trade, like a bag of flour." Ashki looked at her. He did not say, "I am sorry." He did not offer pity. He simply looked at her, and his eyes said he understood. He understood what it felt like to be reduced to a thing, to have your life valued by someone else and found lacking. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. It was the sound of 2 broken pieces fitting together. Trust. It had grown between them, hard-won and solid as the rock at her back. Their alliance did not go unnoticed. Their small network of helpers grew, bound by a shared sense of justice. Matran would close her shop an hour early and walk the trail to No Name's lean-to. She brought salt, which was more precious than gold. She brought bullets for the old rifle Ashki had given No Name. She brought clean bandage cloth. "You are a fool, girl," May said, setting down the heavy sack. "Living out here like a lizard. But you are a brave fool. Jory Hale was in the store today." No Name's head snapped up. Jory Hale was Ephraim Pike's foreman, a man with cold eyes and a gun tied low on his hip. "He asked about you," May continued, her face grim. "Called you the little orphan. Asked if you were still in town. I told him you were my problem, not his. He just smiled. I do not like that man's smile." Reverend Cole came, too. His visits were secret, hurried, his face full of worry. He brought news from the town. "I heard Sheriff Brogan," he whispered, twisting his hat in his hands. He was in the post office, talking to that Mr. Hale. They were laughing. They said the paperwork was filed. They said something about county jurisdiction. I do not know what it means, but they sounded victorious. Shadi was their rock. She did not bring supplies or news. She brought wisdom. She took both No Name and Ashki on a long walk, high up the mesa, to a place where a tiny trickle of water seeped from the stone. "This is not Blue Spring," Shadi said, touching the damp rock. "But it is from Blue Spring. The spring is the mother. She feeds many children. Some are seen, like the creek. Some are unseen, like this. The railroad men, they think they can just put a pipe in the mother's heart. They do not understand. If they choke the spring, the whole valley dies, even the water they cannot see." The danger was no longer a vague threat. It was becoming real. Ashki, on a high ridge, saw the signals. Flashes of light, a mirror catching the sun. Once, twice, then a pause, then 3 flashes. "They are talking," he said to No Name. His eyes narrowed. From that ridge, to the survey camp in the east. A few days later, he found it on the trail, a clump of high grass, tied in a knot. But it was not tied with sinew or yucca fiber. It was tied with a thin piece of flax string. "This is not ours," he said, holding it. "This is from the railroad. They use it to bind the survey stakes. They are marking a new path, a hidden one." Jory Hale himself rode the trail the next week. No Name was mending a blanket outside her lean-to. He did not stop, but he slowed his horse to a walk. He looked at her, his eyes traveling over her worn dress, her small shelter. He took in the clean-swept ground, the tiny, smokeless fire pit. He saw everything. He smiled that smile May had warned her about. He tipped his hat, a gesture that was more of an insult than a courtesy, and rode on. Then the sky turned yellow. It happened in an afternoon. The wind, usually so constant, died. The air became thick, still, and heavy. A sickly greenish-yellow light coated the rocks. A storm, Ashki said. He was on the flats below her shelter, moving his family's small herd of horses to a more protected canyon. He had been teaching her to ride, and she was with him, mounted on a steady, calm mare. A bad one. We must move. They were too late. The stillness broke. A low moan came from the east. It grew to a roar, and then they saw it, a solid wall of red dust, 1,000 feet high, moving faster than a running horse. Go! Ashki yelled, striking her mare's rump. To the rocks, the cleft I showed you! The horses panicked. The wall of red hit them. It was not wind. It was a physical blow, a solid thing made of sand and grit. The world disappeared. There was no sky, no ground, only a roaring, suffocating blindness. No Name could not see her own hands. The grit filled her mouth, her nose, her eyes. The mare screamed and tried to bolt, but No Name held on. Her panic was a cold, hard thing, but her training was sharper. The rocks, the cleft that curves. Ashki's voice was in her head. She smelled the horses, heard their panicked whinnies. She was blinded, but she knew the land. She turned her mare's head, pulling hard, guessing the direction. This way, she screamed, though her voice was stolen by the wind. She felt a hand on her arm. It was Ashki. He had found her in the red chaos. He was shouting, but she could not hear him. He ripped his own neckerchief from his face and tied it tight around hers, covering her eyes and nose. It was a desperate, protective gesture. Then he grabbed her hand. It was not a gentle touch. It was a lifeline. His grip was iron. He pulled her. He was on foot, leading his own horse, pulling hers, pulling her. They moved as one unit, blind, choking, bound together. She felt the ground change, from soft sand to hard stone. She felt the wind lessen, just slightly. As they entered the mouth of the rock cleft, they stumbled into the narrow passage, the horses crowding in behind them, their bodies pressed tight. They huddled there. He and she pressed against the stone wall. The storm raged outside the cleft, a monster screaming in the dark, in their pocket of stone. It was almost quiet. They were covered in a thick layer of red dust. They were both breathing hard, their lungs burning. He still held her hand. His grip was still iron. He did not let go. She did not pull away. They stayed like that, a man and a woman anchored in the heart of the storm, as the world was scoured clean around them. The storm lasted for 2 hours. When it passed, it left a world remade, silent and still, buried under a new layer of red. The blow came the next day. The storm had passed, but the real disaster had arrived. Reverend Cole walked all the way from Red Butte, his face the color of ash. They did it, he said, his voice cracking. He did not even look at her shelter. He just stood in the middle of the trail, a broken man. They have won. What? No Name said, her voice raw from the sand. Ashki stood beside her, his hand on his knife. The claim, the preacher said. Cinder and Pike. They filed it at the county seat. It is legal. How? Ashki's voice was a growl. The land is ours. The treaty. The treaty does not matter, Cole said, his eyes hollow. They found a man, a dying man, from the edge of the territory. A man named Hastian Yazi. They paid him. He signed a document with his thumbprint. As a community representative, he signed away all rights to the water at Blue Spring. It is done. It has the county seal. Ashki stared at him. The blood drained from his face. Hastian Yazi, he whispered. He was cast out. He is a drunk. He speaks for no one. He speaks for them. Reverend Cole said, and the law says he speaks for you. They took the news to Shadi. The old woman listened, her face growing still. The news was a death blow. The legal paper was a knife in their back. When the preacher had finished, Shadi did not weep. She did not rage. She went into her hogan and came back with a small pouch. She untied it and took a pinch of yellow corn pollen. She held it to the sky. She scattered it to the east, where the sun rises, to the south, where the summer comes from, to the west, where the sun sets, and to the north, where the winter comes. She said no words. It was a simple, quiet gesture, a prayer for harmony in a world that had none. She looked at Ashki, at his devastated face. "The paper is a lie," she said, her voice firm. "The water is the truth. We are still here." She turned her gaze to No Name, who was clutching the broken amulet at her neck. The old woman's eyes were sharp. "The fight is here, child. They have used a piece of paper. Now, you must use yours." No Name looked at her, confused. "I have no paper." "You have your letters." Shadi said, "You have your story. And you," she pointed to the amulet, "have your past, the woman with the blanket. She was lost, but you are found. You must find your name. A name has power, more power than a lying piece of paper." No Name looked at the amulet. It was no longer a comfort. It was a map. It was a weapon. The question was no longer, who was I? The question was, who am I now? The fight for the water and the fight for her name had become the same. The paper was a lie, but it was a lie that held the power of the law. Ephraim Pike had beaten them, not with guns, but with a thumbprint from a broken, drunken man. The legal document, stamped by the county, was a death warrant for Blue Spring. No Name sat at her lean-to, the cold desert night seeping into her bones. Ashki was gone. He had ridden out after Reverend Cole left, his face a mask of stone. He had gone to find Hastian Yazi, the man who had sold his people's future, but she knew it was pointless. The signature was on the paper. She looked at the charcoal stick in her hand, the one she used to teach him his letters. He was learning to read a world that was already written against him. She realized something. The legal claim was just the permission. The real threat was the action, the pipeline, the steam engines, the pumps. Cinder and Pike would not just show up with shovels. A plan that big, a plan to move an entire spring, would have a map, a schematic, a blueprint, and she knew where it had to be. Ephraim Pike had an office. He was too important to work from the saloon, so he rented the entire second floor above it. It was the only two-story building in Red Butte, besides the church steeple. He was a man of paper and plans. The map would be there. She waited until 2 hours past midnight. When the saloon's piano finally went silent and the last drunk had been thrown into the street, she had a plan, worked out in whispers with May Tran. May, claiming a delivery of spoiled grain, rolled a barrel of rotting meal down the boardwalk and accidentally smashed it open in the alley behind the saloon. The stench was immediate and overwhelming. It brought the saloon's night porter out, cursing. May, in turn, began shouting at him, accusing him of leaving rats in her storage. It was the perfect diversion. While they were screaming at each other, a small figure slipped from the shadows. No Name was dressed in a boy's clothes, her hair tucked tightly under a canvas cap May had given her. She moved like the shadow Ashki had taught her to be. She found the back stairs, the ones the saloon girls used. They were rickety, and one of the steps moaned under her weight. She froze. Below, May shrieked even louder. "I demand to see the owner!" No Name continued, her heart a hammer against her ribs. She reached the top landing, a single hallway. One door was dark. The other had a sliver of light beneath it. Pike's office. She listened. Nothing. She tried the knob. Locked. She pulled a thin, hard wire from her boot, a tool she had taken from a broken cinch. Ashki had taught her how to pick a simple lock, just as she had taught him the letter B. "Everything is a kind of trap," he had said, "and every trap has a way out." She worked the wire, her fingers sensitive, feeling the tumblers. It took a full minute, an eternity in the dark. A dull click. The knob turned. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her so softly it made no sound. The room smelled wrong. It smelled of the East. Expensive cigar smoke, leather-bound books, and furniture polish. A single lamp was turned low on a massive desk. This was Pike's den. She did not look at the books. She went to the desk. It, too, was locked. The lock was better. Brass. She tried the wire. It bent. She tried again, forcing her panic down. Click. She pulled the drawer open. It was full of papers. Contracts, invoices, letters. She sifted through them. Her new reading skills put to the test. C-L-I-M claim. She saw the document, the one Reverend Cole had described, but she ignored it. She needed the map. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of ledgers, she found it. It was a large roll of blueprint paper. She spread it out on the desk. Her breath caught. It was all there. Blue Spring Diversion Project. It showed the spring itself, marked as the collection point. It showed the path of a thick iron pipe, labeled main conduit, running straight through the valley, cutting across the dying grazing lands. It led to a large square labeled Cinder and Pike Pumping Station and Siding. They were not just taking the water. They were building a factory to do it. She could not take the map. It was too large. Its absence would be noticed immediately. She grabbed the charcoal stick from her pocket. She had brought a piece of clean butcher paper from May's store, folded in her shirt. She spread it out. Her hand moved, fast and certain. She was not a sketch artist, but she had a sharp memory. She drew the lines, the spring, the path of the pipe, the location of the pumping station. She copied the labels. She got it all. At the bottom of the blueprint, she saw it. A dark, embossed circle. A red wax seal. Authorized by mandate. Red Butte County. It read. She could not copy that. The power was in the seal. The floorboard creaked in the hallway. No name froze. She did not have time to roll the blueprint, to close the drawer. She only had time to snatch her own drawing, to shove it inside her shirt. The door opened. It was Jory Hale. His gun was in his hand. His eyes were sleepy. He had likely been dozing in a chair down the hall. He saw the open desk. The blueprint spread out. He raised his pistol. "Do not move a muscle, boy," he snarled. Then his eyes focused on her face in the lamplight. The cap, the boy's clothes. He squinted, and then he smiled that smile May hated. "Well, I will be damned," he whispered. "The orphan? You have got more spine than I figured." No Name looked at the gun. Then she looked at the heavy glass inkwell on Pike's desk. She did not think. She acted. She grabbed the inkwell and threw it, not at his face, but at the lamp. The glass shattered. The room plunged into total darkness, the oil igniting in a small whoosh on the desk. Jory cursed, momentarily blinded. He fired his gun. A deafening blast in the small room. The bullet went wild, smashing into the wall. No Name did not run for the door. She ran for the window. She picked up Pike's heavy leather chair and threw it straight through the glass. The sound of the breaking window was her signal. She scrambled over the sill and onto the narrow wooden overhang that served as the saloon's second-floor porch. "Get back here, you rat," Jory yelled from inside. She heard him vaulting the sill behind her. She ran. The roof was pitched, slippery with the night's dew. The street below was dark and empty. She reached the edge of the building. A 10-foot gap of black air separated her from the flat roof of Maytrans Mercantile. Spanning part of the gap was the huge, gaudy sign, Silver Spur Saloon. Jory was on the roof behind her. He was raising his pistol again. No Name did not hesitate. She took 2 running steps and leaped. She launched herself into the air, aiming for the sign. Her hands caught the top edge, the rough wood tearing at her palms. Her body swung, a pendulum in the dark. Jory fired. The bullet splintered the sign, inches from her head. She used the momentum of her swing. She kicked her legs, pulled with her arms, and scrambled onto the top of the sign. She ran across its narrow spine, leaped the last few feet, and landed hard on the flat, tarred roof of the mercantile. She scrambled to the back, her lungs on fire, the old wooden fire escape ladder. She grabbed it and slid, not bothering with the rungs, the wood burning her hands. She hit the alley dirt in a heap. A hand grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet. It was Ashki. His face was a mask of fury. "He shot at you," he hissed. He had been in the alley, the lookout, the entire time. He had heard the shot. "I am all right," she panted. "I got it." He did not wait. He pulled her, and they ran. They did not use the trails. They used the shadows, the creek beds, the hidden paths he had taught her. They ran, melting into the landscape, leaving the shouting and the chaos of Red Butte behind. They did not stop until they reached the safety of her lean-to. She stumbled against the rock face, gasping for breath, her whole body shaking. She was triumphant. She pulled the crumpled paper from her shirt. "I got it, Ashki," she said, her voice a breathless rasp. "The map, the whole plan. I got—" He did not look at the paper. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip like iron. He was shaking, but it was not from fear. It was from a rage so deep it terrified her. "You fool," he growled, his voice low and vibrating. "You absolute fool. He shot at you." "I am alive," she said, trying to pull away. "He could have killed you," he roared, shaking her. "For this," he snatched the paper from her hand and crumpled it. "For a piece of paper, what is this worth your life? I told you, I cannot—" He stopped, his throat closing. He could not say it. "I cannot lose you, too. I cannot watch another person I care for be taken from me." But she heard what he did not say, and it broke something inside her. All her fear, all her pain, all her rage at a life of being property, exploded. "Do not!" she screamed, shoving him back with all her strength. He was so surprised he stumbled. "Do not you dare! I am not Hastian. I am not your little brother to be mourned. I am not another ghost for you to carry." Tears of fury streamed down her face, cutting paths through the soot. "And I am not your property to keep safe. I was sold for seed. Ashki, I was a thing. I am not a thing anymore. I am your partner. You fight your way, with your horses and your silence. I fight my way, with my mind and my anger. You cannot hide me to keep me safe. I will not be hidden." The truth of her words struck him silent. He looked at her, truly looked at her. She was not a girl he was protecting. She was not a victim he had saved. She was a warrior, standing in the ruins of her life, holding a weapon she had stolen from the enemy. She was his equal. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a slow, dawning shame. He unclenched his fists. He stooped and picked up the crumpled drawing he had thrown to the ground. He carefully smoothed it out. He held it out to her, not as a prize, but as an offering. "You are right," he said, his voice raw. "You are not a thing to be hidden. You are a partner." She took the paper, her hands still shaking. The silence that fell between them was profound, a new understanding forged in fire and gunpowder. They took the drawing to May Tran at dawn. She locked the door of her mercantile and poured 3 cups of black chicory. She studied the map. "This is it, girl," she said, her voice grim. "This is the monster. But this," she tapped the paper, "is just the plan. The paper from the county is the permission. Our problem is bigger than a pipe." May looked at No Name, then at Ashki. "Love and justice," she said, her sharp eyes softening for just a moment. "In this territory, they are the same thing. They only survive if they can stand up in a courtroom. And if they can stand up in front of a gun. You survived the gun last night, girl. Now we have to find a way to beat the courtroom." As if summoned by her words, the bell on May's door jangled. It was Reverend Cole. He was agitated, his face pale, and he was clutching a folded, yellowed piece of paper. "May, No Name, I have done as you asked. he said, breathing hard. After Shadi told me about the woman, the blanket, I wrote to my colleagues in Santa Fe. I asked them to search the old mission records, the newspapers. He unfolded the paper. It was a page from the Santa Fe Gazette, dated 15 years prior. It was a missing persons notice. It says, he read, his finger trembling, lost Sarah Coalfield and daughter, Maren Coalfield, aged 4 years, last seen traveling near the Galena territories. Mrs. Coalfield was known to possess a handmade blanket with a distinctive blue cross stitch. He pointed to a crude woodcut illustration in the corner of the advertisement. It was a drawing of the blanket's pattern. No Name's hand flew to her throat. She pulled out the broken amulet. She held the turquoise stone next to the faded ink. The carved pattern on the stone was identical to the stitch pattern in the newspaper. Maren, No Name whispered. She said the name aloud. Maren Coalfield. It felt like a stone in her mouth, foreign and heavy. A fragile hope, a new and terrifying identity, began to dawn in her. She was someone. The bell on May's door jangled again, this time with brutal force. The door burst open. Sheriff Brogan stood there, flanked by 2 deputies. May, you are harboring fugitives. Brogan said. She works for me, Sheriff, and you know it, May snapped, stepping in front of No Name. Not her, Brogan said, his eyes cold. He looked past her, at Ashki, him and his family. What have you done? Ashki's voice was a low growl. Just doing my duty, Brogan said with a grin. My men were patrolling the perimeter of the Cinder and Pike property, as is my right. And we found a spy. Ashki's young cousin, the boy she had saved at the market, ran in from the street, his face streaming with tears. Ashki, they took Shadi, they took her. We found the old woman trespassing on private land, Brogan said, his voice hard. Spying on the survey camp. We have arrested her for espionage and agitation against the railroad. She was gathering herbs, the boy cried. It is our land. Not anymore, Brogan said, tapping the legal paper in his breast pocket. It is Cinder and Pike land, and she is in my jail. Ashki moved, a blur of rage, but the deputy's guns were up in an instant. I would not. Ashki, Brogan said, his smile returning. This can be simple. You are the man of your family now. Are you not? You want the old woman back easy? You sign a new paper, a clean one that says you and your people agree with Hasty Nyaze's claim. You sign. She goes free. And if I do not, Ashki said, his voice shaking with the effort to control his fury. Then she goes to the county seat, Brogan said, his voice dropping. On a long, hot, dusty wagon ride. It is a hard trip for an old woman. She might not survive the paperwork. It was a death sentence. Ashki was trapped. His love for Shadi, his duty to his family, was a noose around his neck. He looked at May, at No Name, his face a mask of agony. He was being forced to trade the life of his people for the life of his mother. The street outside was silent. The whole town was watching. No Name saw his defeat. She saw the smirk on Brogan's face. She felt the new, fragile name, Maren, in her chest. And she felt a fire that burned hotter than Jory Hale's gunpowder. She walked out of the store. She walked past Ashki. She walked past Brogan. She stood in the middle of the dusty street, directly in front of the Silver Spurs saloon. The railroad men on the porch stopped talking. She was just a girl in a torn dress, covered in soot and dust. You all call me No Name, she shouted, her voice clear and ringing. It echoed off the false front buildings. You call me a vagrant, a thief, an Indian lover. She pointed a trembling finger at the jail. That woman in there, she cried, is more honorable than this entire town, that man. She pointed to Ashki. Is a better man than any of you, and that man, she pointed at Brogan, is a coward and a puppet. A collective gasp went up from the boardwalk. Jory Hale was now watching from the saloon's broken window, his face dark. "You think you have one?" she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous intensity. "You think your lying paper and your paid-off drunk give you the right to steal a people's life? You think I am nothing." She put her hand on the broken amulet at her neck. "I have a name," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "And you will know it. You will all know it. I will tell it to you myself, the day we get that water back, and not 1 second sooner." She turned her back on them, an act of defiance so profound the entire street held its breath. She walked back to Ashki, who was staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Do not sign," she whispered, grabbing his arm. "We will get her back, and we will keep the spring." Before Brogan could recover from his shock, a telegraph boy ran up, waving a flimsy piece of paper. "Sheriff Mr. Hale, it is from Mr. Pike. The equipment is on the train. He says to begin construction. Day after tomorrow." The clock was ticking. They had less than 48 hours. Shadi was in jail. The railroad was coming. The clock was no longer ticking. It was a hammer, falling. Less than 48 hours. Shadi was in a cell, a hostage. The railroad was coming. A snake of iron and steam. Sheriff Brogan's offer was a loaded pistol to Ashki's head sign, "Away your people's life, or your mother dies." Ashki stood in the dusty street, his face a mask of such agony that No Name could not breathe. He was trapped. He looked at Shadi's empty place, at his young cousin's tear-streaked face. Duty to his family was a law older than any treaty. He took a single, defeated step toward the jail. "No!" No Name's voice was not loud, but it cut through his despair. She still had his arm. Her grip was as tight as his had been on her in the storm. "You cannot. It is what they want." "She will die," he whispered, his voice broken. "Like Hastian, on a long, hot trip, I cannot—" "We will not let her," No Name said, her voice fierce. She turned to May Tran, who was standing on the mercantile porch, her face a thundercloud. "May, the jail. How many deputies?" "2, May said, her voice clipped. "But it is not the jail, not the one in town. It is too public. Brogan is not that stupid. He is holding her at the survey camp." Hope, sharp and painful, lanced through No Name. The Cinder and Pike camp. "No," May said. "His own, a private camp, set up between the town and the surveyors, just off the main trail. He calls it a temporary substation. I call it a den of thieves. He keeps his private whiskey there, and, it seems, his private prisoners." Ashki's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been dead with grief, were now blazing. A private camp. Not a fortress, a soft target. "Reverend Cole," No Name said, turning to the preacher, who was wringing his hands. "We need a diversion, a big one. At midnight." "Child, I cannot—" "You can," she said, her voice hard. "You told me not to seek vengeance. This is not vengeance. This is justice. You have a bell. At midnight, I want you to ring it. Ring it like you did for the fire. Ring it until every man in that saloon, every deputy in that office, runs into the street thinking the town is under attack." The preacher looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, and saw a conviction his own prayers lacked. He nodded, his face pale. "I will ring the bell." "May," Ashki said, his voice low and dangerous. "We need rope, a lot of it, and cloth to muffle the horses' hooves." "Done," May said. The rest of the day was a blur of silent, desperate preparation. The town simmered in the heat, unaware. Brogan sat in his office, his boots on his desk, waiting for Ashki to crawl to him. He was still waiting when the sun went down. Night fell heavy and moonless. A thin, whining wind picked up, carrying the first stinging grains of a new dust storm. It was not a wall of red, but a low, gritty fog that cut visibility to 10 feet. It was a gift. Ashki and No Name moved like ghosts. Their horses' hooves were wrapped in thick cloth, making no sound. They did not ride the trail. They cut through the rocky passes, using the paths Ashki had taught her. He moved with a speed and silence that was inhuman. He was a predator, and he was hunting. They found the camp in a small, sheltered box canyon. 2 tents, a ring of dying fire, 6 horses at a picket line, and a small, newly built wooden shed, barely larger than an outhouse, with a heavy padlock on the door. 2 men, deputies she did not recognize, sat by the fire, drinking from a bottle. 2 guards, Ashki whispered, his mouth so close to her ear she felt his breath. The horses, the shed. Brogan, she whispered back. His tent, the larger one. He is asleep, or drunk. They tied their own horses 100 yards away. Ashki uncoiled the ropes. He did not give her one. He simply went to work. He moved in a low crouch, a shadow in the swirling dust. He tied a tripwire, thin and strong, across the main path from the fire to the shed. He tied another across the opening to the horses. He pointed to the shed. He pointed to his knife. He pointed to her. Cut me a diversion. She nodded. She understood. He moved to the far side of the small canyon. He put his fingers to his lips. He let out a sound. It was not a whistle. It was the high, screaming cry of a hawk. A sound of attack. It was loud, piercing, and it came from the rocks above the camp. The 2 deputies jumped to their feet, grabbing their rifles. "What in hell?" one of them yelled. Ashki made the sound again, this time from 20 yards to the left. He was throwing his voice, throwing the sound. "It is just a bird, you fool," the others said. "That ain't no bird," the first deputy insisted, walking toward the rocks. "Sounded like—" He hit Ashki's first tripwire. He went down hard, his rifle clattering on the stones. His partner cursed and ran toward him. That was No Name's moment. She was not a shadow. She was a bullet. She ran from the darkness, straight for the picket line. The horses, already nervous from the wind and the strange cry, shied as she ran at them. She pulled Ashki's knife from her boot and with 2 slashes, cut the picket line free. "Yeah!" she screamed, slapping the led horse on the rump. "Go!" Chaos. The horses, now free, bolted. They hit the second tripwire, which sent the whole line into a panic. They thundered through the small camp, kicking over the coffee pot, scattering the fire. The deputies were shouting. A light came on in Brogan's tent. No Name ran to the shed. "Shadi!" she yelled, pounding on the door. A muffled sound from within. No Name put the wire pick she had used at Pike's office into the heavy padlock. Her hands were shaking. The wind was whipping her hair across her face, blinding her. The door to Brogan's tent burst open. Sheriff Brogan stood there, his long underwear tucked into his boots, his face swollen with sleep and rage. He held a lantern in one hand and his pistol in the other. "You!" he roared when he saw her. He raised the pistol. A rock, the size of a man's fist, flew from the darkness and shattered the lantern in Brogan's hand. The camp plunged back into darkness, lit only by the scattered coals of the fire. "Get her!" Brogan screamed, firing his pistol at the spot where the rock had come from. The 2 deputies were scrambling, one trying to catch the horses, the other trying to find his rifle. Click! The lock sprang open. No Name tore the door open. Shadi was inside, huddled on the dirt floor. She was weak, but her eyes were bright and furious. "Come," No Name said, pulling the old woman to her feet. "Where is Ashki?" Shadi rasped. "He is busy," No Name said, pushing her out the door. "Stop!" a new voice yelled. It was one of the Longcoats. He must have been sleeping in the other tent. He stepped into the firelight, his long duster flapping. He raised his rifle, aiming not at No Name, but at Brogan, who was a confused shadow. No, he was aiming at Ashki, who was moving behind Brogan. "Ashki, look out!" No Name screamed. The Longcoat fired. The blast was deafening. Ashki cried out, a sharp, choked sound, and fell. The longcoat turned, working the lever of his rifle, trying to find No Name in the dark. "No!" Shadi shrieked. She grabbed a burning branch from the fire and threw it, with all her strength, at the longcoat's face. He yelled, batting at the sparks, and his next shot went wild into the night sky. "Run!" No Name screamed, pulling Shadi. "Not without him," Shadi said, planting her feet. No Name looked back. Ashki was on his knees, trying to stand. Brogan, in the confusion, was running for his own horse, which had been tied separately. "I will get him," No Name said. "Go to the rocks, where we tied our horses. Go!" She shoved Shadi into the dark. She ran back for Ashki. The camp was a mess. The longcoat was cursing, his face burned. The deputies were nowhere to be seen. Ashki was on his feet, leaning against a wagon wheel. His left side was dark. "I am fine," he grunted, but his voice was thin. "You are a terrible liar," she said, grabbing his good arm and pulling it over her shoulder. She took his weight. He was heavy. They stumbled away from the camp, disappearing into the dust-filled wind. Behind them, they heard Brogan shouting, his voice mad with fury. "Find them! Find them all! $100 to the man who brings me the girl's head!" They made it to the horses. Shadi was already on hers. No Name helped Ashki mount, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "Where?" she asked. "Not the lean-to," he whispered. "The town, Maze? It is the only place—" He slumped forward, his good hand gripping the horse's mane. No Name mounted her own mare. Grabbing his reins, she led them, a desperate, limping procession, through the stinging, dusty rain, back toward the lights of Red Butte. They reached the alley behind May's store just as the sky was turning a sickly gray. May opened the storeroom door, her face white. "Shadi, thank God," May said, helping the old woman down. Then she saw Ashki. "Oh, Lord, bring him in, on the cot." They half carried him, half dragged him inside. May lit a lamp. The bullet had torn through the thick muscle of his shoulder. High up, it had gone clean through, but it was bleeding, a lot of blood. No Name's hands, the hands that had picked locks and drawn maps, were now shaking so badly she could not unwrap the bandage. May gently pushed her aside. "I will do this. You go to Brogan's office. You must, before he does." "What?" No Name was stunned. "His office, girl," May said, her voice sharp as she pressed a clean cloth to Ashki's shoulder. "The rescue was for Shadi, but the proof. Brogan will be in a rage. He will ride back here and destroy everything. But he will check his office first. He will check his safe." His safe. He is corrupt, not stupid. He keeps a ledger, a record of every bribe, every payment to and from Cinder and Pike. It is his insurance. He will try to destroy it. You must get it before he does. "I cannot, Ashki." "I will care for him," Shadi said, her voice firm. She was already boiling water. "You are our hands. You are our feet. Go, now." Ashki's eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, his face tight with pain. "Go," he whispered. She ran. The town was just waking up. She slipped through the alley and came up to the side of the sheriff's office. The front was dark. She tried the side window. Locked. She used her wire. The lock was old. Simple. She slid the window open and climbed inside. The office was cold. It smelled of stale tobacco. She went straight to the heavy iron safe in the corner. It was a combination lock. She had no idea. She looked at Brogan's desk, a stack of papers, a whiskey bottle, and a small Bible. She opened it, tucked inside the cover. Written in Brogan's own sloppy hand were 4 numbers. She spun the dial. 1, 5, 3, 0. The handle turned. Inside was a stack of money, a bottle of whiskey, and a thin, black-bound book. She grabbed the book. She opened it. May 4th, $10. J. Hale, lost horse. May 7th, $50. C. Per, land survey fees. May 10th, $100. E. Pike, community relations. It was all there, page after page of it. And on the inside cover, embossed in gold, was the official corporate seal of the Cinder and Pike Railroad. It was the proof. She heard a horse, riding hard, stop in the street out front. It was Brogan. She did not go for the window. She ran to the back room, the one with the cells. She unlocked the back door and slipped into the alley just as Brogan's heavy boots hit the boardwalk out front. She ran all the way back to May's. She burst into the storeroom. May had stitched Ashki's shoulder. He was pale, but awake. Shadi was drinking hot tea. No Name threw the black ledger onto the cot. "We got it," she panted. May and Reverend Cole, who had just arrived, were on the first stagecoach to the county seat. 2 hours later, they had the ledger. They had the law on their side. No Name sat by Ashki's cot, changing his bandage. The adrenaline was gone, leaving her cold and exhausted. He was feverish. His skin was hot. "You led," he whispered, his eyes closed. "You led the way." "We did it together," she said. Shadi returned later that day. She had gone out, despite the danger. She had gathered her people, and a few of the settlers who lived on the edge of town, the ones who shared the grazing land. "I have spoken," Shadi said, her voice carrying a new weight. "The paper law has failed us." She looked at No Name. "The white man's law is too slow, or it is bought." A telegraph message arrived for May. It was from the county seat. Reverend Cole's words were stark. "Judge saw ledger, declared it stolen, inadmissible. Hearing set for 3 weeks. Pike was here. Justice is delayed." Delayed. It was a death sentence. The equipment was due tomorrow. The law had failed. That night, the sky glowed red, but it was not the dawn. Jory Hale in his long coats, furious at the rescue, at the theft of the ledger, at the injury to one of his men, had taken their own revenge. They rode past the lean-to. They did not touch it. They did not go to the mesas. They rode straight for Maytran's warehouse. The fire was huge, a roaring inferno that lit up all of Red Butte. May's supplies, her flour, her seed, her cloth. Everything was gone. May, No Name, and Shadi stood in the alley, watching it burn. May was not crying. Her face was calm, her eyes as hot as the fire. "He did not get it all," May said, her voice a low hiss. She reached into the pocket of her apron, the only thing she had saved. She pulled out a small, heavy tube of copper. It was sealed with wax. "A man came to me," May said, "a surveyor for the railroad. He had a conscience. He quit last week. He left this for me. He said he was ashamed. He said it was the key." No Name took it. She broke the wax. Inside was not a key. It was a small, rolled piece of parchment. It was another map, but it showed a detail her drawing did not. "The shut-off valve," No Name whispered, her finger tracing the diagram. "They have a main valve, a place to stop the flow in case of a break. It is hidden. Here." She pointed to a spot on the map, a place high in the rocks, away from the spring. This is how we stop it." As she spoke, a sound came from the darkness. A mirror, flashing from the high ridge. A signal from Ashki's scouts. 1, 2, 3. A pause. 1. "They are here," Shadi said, her voice grim. "The wagons. They are at the spring." No Name looked at the burning warehouse. She looked at the copper tube in her hand. She walked back into the storeroom. Ashki was trying to sit up, his face a mask of sweat and pain. We must—" "No," No Name said. She gently pushed him back down. His arm was useless. He was weak with fever. "You will rest. You have done your part." She turned to Shadi. Gather the people, the ones who will stand with us. Tell them to meet me at the spring. Tell them to bring shovels. She looked at Ashki, her eyes meeting his. The fear was gone. The desperation was gone. There was only a cold, clear purpose. I will lead them, she said. I know the map. I know the valve. We will stop them. She was, for the first time, not running. She was not surviving. She was leading. They did not go back to the lean-to. It was the first place Jory Hale would look. They did not stay in the smoking ruins of Maze Alley. The entire town was a trap, a cage waiting to be sprung. No Name, now the leader of a broken army of 3, had to make a choice. Shadi was old and exhausted. Ashki was a dead weight, semi-conscious, his breathing shallow, his skin burning with fever. Where? Shadi asked, her voice a dry rasp. No Name looked up at the high, dark mesas, the wind still whipping the stinging dust. The place from the storm, she said. The cleft in the rock. It overlooks the spring. It is defensible. We can see them coming. It was a nightmare, getting him there. Shadi led the horses, and No Name walked beside Ashki, holding him in the saddle. He was heavy, a solid, dying weight. Every step was an agony. He mumbled, lost in a fever dream, calling out for Hastian, for his mother. They reached the narrow cleft in the rock, the same one that had saved them from the red wall of dust. It was deep, a scar in the stone, protected from the wind. They half dragged, half lowered him from the horse. He needs a doctor, No Name whispered, her voice cracking. We are all we have, Shadi said. She was already gathering stones, building a small, smokeless fire pit in the deepest part of the cleft, just as Ashki had taught them. There is water in the canteen, and I have herbs. We will fight this fever. The night deepened. A cold, fine drizzle began to fall, a miserable, clinging mist that soaked their clothes and chilled them to the bone. Shadi worked over Ashki, forcing a bitter tea of herbs between his lips. He coughed and turned his head, but he swallowed. You, Shadi said, looking at No Name. You are the leader now. You must rest. The fight is tomorrow, at dawn. I cannot rest, No Name said. She was shaking, not from cold, but from a terror so profound it threatened to swallow her. She was a girl who knew how to run, how to hide, how to survive. She did not know how to lead. She did not know how to win. Shadi took her hand. The old woman's grip was surprisingly strong. You are not alone. Our people are moving. The ones who trust me, they are coming to the valley. They will meet you at the spring. They have few guns. They have shovels. They have their hands. But they will come. You must be the one to tell them where to stand. Shadi nodded toward the horses. Now, rest. I will watch him. No Name stumbled to the mouth of the cleft. She sat on a cold stone, overlooking the valley. She could see them, far below. The lights of the Cinder and Pike camp, glowing like a nest of angry wasps at the mouth of the canyon. Near the spring, they were here. The wagons, the tripods, the men. They were preparing to drink the earth. The drizzle turned her thin boy's shirt into a second, icy skin. She held the copper tube in her hand. The map that was their only hope. The valve. She had to get to the valve. She heard a sound behind her, a low moan. She went back into the darkness of the cleft. Shadi was dozing, exhausted, her head on her chest. Ashki was thrashing, his good arm pushing the blanket away. He was burning up. No, he mumbled. Not the water, Hastian. His wound was bleeding again. The bandage May had tied was soaked through, dark and ugly in the faint light from the coals. No Name knelt beside him. Her hands were shaking. She had to clean it. She had to stop the bleeding. She took the last of the clean cloth from May's and the canteen. She gently unwrapped the bandage. The wound was raw, angry, a puckered hole in the smooth, copper skin of his shoulder. He hissed in his sleep as the cold air hit it. It is all right, she whispered. though her voice was trembling. "I am here. It is all right." She dipped the cloth in the water. Her touch was hesitant. She was a girl who had known only violence and neglect. She did not know how to be gentle, but she tried. She cleaned the wound, her fingers moving slowly, wiping away the blood. He was so still. His strength, the thing that had defined him, was gone. He was just a man, broken and vulnerable, his life held in her shaking hands. He had saved her. He had believed in no name, and she had led him to this. She looked at her own hands, stained with his blood. She thought of the name Reverend Cole had found. Marin. It felt like a name for a ghost, a little girl who was lost. That was not her. And she thought of No Name, the orphan, the survivor, the one who had stood in the street and made a vow. A wave of cold, desolate fear washed over her. "If I die tomorrow," she thought, the words a silent prayer in her heart. "If Jory Hale's bullet finds me, who will I be? Will anyone even know my name? Who will call my name when I am gone?" She finished cleaning the wound. She rewrapped it, her hands steadier now, the knot tight. She had done all she could. She sat back on her heels, the cold and the fear making her weak. A hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His good hand. Her head snapped up. His eyes were open. They were not the hazy eyes of fever. They were clear, dark, and focused on her. He had been awake. He had heard her. He did not speak. He just looked at her, his gaze stripping away every layer, every wall, every bit of dust and grime until he was looking straight at the fractured, lonely soul inside. He saw the girl who had been sold for seed. He saw the warrior who had leaped across the saloon roof. He saw the terrified leader. He saw her. With his one good hand, he pulled. His grip was weak, but his intention was iron. He pulled her down until her face was level with his. She resisted for a second, startled, and then she went, collapsing beside him on the hard stone floor. He was too weak to lift his head, so he pulled her closer, until her forehead was resting against his. His skin was burning hot, but the contact was a jolt of lightning. She closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. The smell of him, wood smoke and fever and the herb Shaddy had used, filled her senses. All the distance between them, all the unspoken words, all the barriers of race and pain, collapsed into nothing. There was only this, the cleft in the rock, the sound of the rain, the heat of his skin. He let out a long, slow breath, and then he whispered. His voice was a raw, broken thing, barely louder than the falling rain, but it was the most powerful sound she had ever heard. "You are mine," he breathed, "forever." It was not a claim of ownership. It was not the voice of a man taking a thing. It was a vow. It was an answer. It was the anchoring of her soul. He was not naming her Marin. He was not naming her no name. He was naming her his. He was telling her that her life mattered, that it was bound to his, that if she fell, he would fall with her, that if she died, she would not be forgotten, because she belonged to him, just as he belonged to her. She did not answer. She could not speak. She just let out the breath she had been holding for 19 years. A single tear cut a path through the grime on her cheek. She was, for the first time in her life, not alone. She had been named. They stayed like that for a long time, their breathing slowing, matching. The rain pattered on the rocks outside. Shadi slept on. The old woman's quiet snores a rhythm of peace in the heart of the storm. "When this is done," No Name finally whispered, her lips moving against his hot skin. "When we have the water." "When we have the water," he agreed, his voice a low rumble. "Shadi," she said, "we will ask her to bind us, the way she told me, with the hair, the corn pollen. A simple thing, he repeated. A binding. It was settled, a promise of a future, a thing to fight for. She felt a new strength flow into her. The fear was still there, A cold knot in her stomach, but it was no longer in charge. She was Marin, she said, so quietly she was not sure she had spoken. What? He mumbled, his eyes slipping closed again, the fever taking him. My name, she said, pulling back just enough to look at his face. The one from the newspaper. It is Marin. I will use it tomorrow. After we win, I will stand in front of everyone, and I will tell them my name is Marin. She was claiming her past, but her future was the man lying in her arms. He gave a small, faint smile, and then the fever pulled him back under. The sound of a train whistle, long and mournful, cut through the night. It was from the Red Butte station. Ephraim Pike's private car had arrived. Jory Hale was waiting on the platform, his hat in his hand, his face still red from Shadi's burning branch. He was angry. Mr. Pike, he said, as his boss stepped down onto the platform. We have a problem. The old Indian woman is gone. The girl and the scout broke her out. They stole Brogan's ledger, and I am aware of your failures, Mr. Hale. Ephraim Pike said, his voice a cold, silken razor. He was impeccably dressed, his dark suit unwrinkled. The ledger is an embarrassment, but it is not admissible. I have already spoken to the judge. Our claim is secure. The equipment is in the valley. We begin at dawn. What about the girl? Jory snarled. And the scout. They are still out there. Pike looked up at the dark mesas, the fine mist dampening his suit jacket. He took a cigar from a silver case. The construction will proceed. You will take your men, the long coats, and you will guard the crews. When the main pipe is set, you will finish the job. Finish, sir. Pike lit his cigar, the flame briefly illuminating his cold, impassive face. This entire valley has been agitated. The Indian problem, the local resistance. It is bad for investors. It is untidy. He drew on the cigar, the tip glowing red. Once the water is secure, Mr. Hale, you will clean up all the loose ends. The old woman, Shadi, the shopkeeper, Matran, the preacher, and the girl, especially the girl. Find her. Find all of them. I want no witnesses. I want no one left to challenge the claim. Do you understand me? Jory Hale's smile returned, cold and empty. Yes, sir. Clean up the witnesses. It will be my pleasure. The third watch of the night, the deepest, darkest hour before the false dawn. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and sharp. No name left Ashki in the cleft. He was sleeping, his fever unbroken, but his breathing was steady. Shadi was awake, her face grim. It is time, Shadi said. No name nodded. She was no longer a girl. She was a general. She took the copper tube map, her charcoal drawing, and the spool of rope. They moved down the winding path to the valley floor, where the blue spring bubbled from the earth. The cinder and pike wagons were there, huge, dark shapes, tripods, engines, and massive sections of iron pipe lay on the ground like the bones of a metal monster. The camp was quiet, only a few guards patrolling. The main workforce was asleep, waiting for daylight. Shadi's people were there, hiding in the rocks, 29 men and women, and 5 white settlers, ranchers from the small holdings who knew Pike's railroad would ruin their grazing land. 2. They were a pathetic army. They had 2 old rifles, a few pistols, and a collection of shovels, picks, and heavy sticks. No name unrolled the map in the dark. She showed them. We cannot win a fight, she said, her voice clear and low, carrying in the night. They have rifles, we have the land, and we have the map. We are not here to fight them. We are here to stop them. She pointed to her drawing. They will bring their main pump here, to the spring itself, but to get there, they must cross this flat. She pointed to a patch of marshy ground. We will make it a pit. We dig. We divert the overflow. We make it a swamp. The picks and shovels went to work, silent and fast. "This path," she pointed to the main trail from their camp, "is where their guards will stand. Shadi." The old woman held up a water skin. It was not water. It was thick, pungent pine oil rendered from the trees on the mesa. "We make the rocks slick," Shadi said. "Where they must stand, they will fall." No Name looked at the copper tube map. She pointed to a spot high on the rocks, 200 yards away. "And this, the valve, their emergency shutoff, it is hidden in that cluster of rocks. That is my job. When they start the pump, I will turn it off." They worked, a desperate, silent team of saboteurs. They dug the mucks. They greased the rocks. They hid their own people in the crags above the work site. Rocks piled to roll down. As the first sickly gray light of dawn touched the sky, they were finished. They melted back into the rocks. Below, a whistle blew. The Cinder and Pike camp came alive. Men were shouting. Jory Hale's voice cut through the air. "Get to it, tripods at the spring. Get that first pipe section in place. The long coats, spread out. Secure the perimeter." The battle for Blue Spring had begun. The dawn broke cold and gray, the color of ash. Jory Hale's whistle was a sharp, ugly sound that cut the morning quiet. It was the signal from the rocks. No Name watched as the Cinder and Pike crews advanced. They were a small army, 30 men at least, carrying heavy tripods, thick iron pipes, and steam-driven pumps. They were not settlers. They were hard men, paid well to do a hard job and ask no questions. Above them, on the ridges, the long coats fanned out. She saw the glint of at least a dozen rifles, positioning themselves to command the entire valley. They were the muscle, ready to kill anyone who interfered. Jory Hale stood on a flat rock, directing his men. "Tripods to the spring, set the pump. I want that first pipe section laid before the sun is high." The first team of 6 men, carrying the main pump on their shoulders, left the hard-packed trail and stepped onto the marshy flat ground that led to the spring's edge. No Name, hidden in a cleft of rock 100 yards away, put 2 fingers to her lips. She gave the high, sharp cry of a hawk. It was the signal. From a ditch hidden by brush, Shaday's small band of ranchers and dine fighters pulled the rocks and earth away. The spring's natural overflow, which had been small, was now joined by the main diversion channel they had dug all night, a waist-high torrent of cold. Muddy water burst from the ground and flooded the flat. The men carrying the pump had no warning. The ground beneath their feet, already soft, dissolved into a thick, churning swamp. They yelled, their boots sinking. The heavy pump tipped, pulling them down. They fell, cursing, into the knee-deep muck. The other crews stopped, confused. Jory Hale roared in fury. "What in hell, get that pump up, move!" The longcoats on the ridges raised their rifles, searching for a target, but as they shifted their weight, their boots found the rocks that Shadi had slicked with pine oil. Men slipped, their feet sliding out from under them. A rifle went off, the shot echoing harmlessly off the canyon walls. They could not get a steady aim. Their high ground was a trap. Jory Hale understood. This was not an accident. This was sabotage. He scanned the rocks, his eyes blazing. He was not looking for the diggers. He was looking for the leader. "Find the girl!" he screamed. "Find her!" No Name knew her diversion had only bought minutes. She broke cover, keeping low, and sprinted for the high cluster of boulders where the copper tube map had shown the emergency shutoff valve. If they started the steam pump, she had to be able to stop it. Jory saw the movement. "There!" he yelled. He ignored his sinking crews, his slipping gunmen. He ran, his boots finding purchase on the main trail. He knew this land. 2. He cut her off, vaulting up the rocks, and cornered her on a wide, flat boulder that overlooked the entire chaotic scene. He was 20 feet away, breathing hard, his face a mask of rage. He raised his heavy pistol, his hand steady. It is over. No name, he snarled. Your little mud puddle, your friends with their shovels, it is all over. He gestured with his gun at the valley. This is a man's world. Girl, and you are just a ghost. You do not even have a name. She stood tall. She was not the girl who had walked into Red Butte, covered in dust. She was not the girl who had been arrested. She was not the girl who had been afraid. She was the woman who had held Ashki's life in her hands, the woman who had been given a vow. The wind whipped her hair, and her eyes were as clear and hard as the turquoise amulet at her neck. My name, she said, her voice clear and carrying over the wind, is Marin. He squinted, confused. What? Marin Coalfield, she said. She took a step toward him, a step he did not expect. And the rest. She looked him dead in the eye, her voice dropping to a low, cold intensity. I will choose, will. Before he could pull the trigger, before he could process her words, a new sound filled the valley. It was not a gunshot. It was a noise of many people. Jory Hale. The voice was May Trans. She was riding a stubborn mule at the head of a crowd. The entire town of Red Butte was walking behind her. The shopkeepers, the prospectors, the women who had whispered, the men from the saloon. They had heard the bell ringing, and they had followed May and the preacher. They stopped at the edge of the valley, a silent, stunned audience to the battle. Jory froze, his gun still aimed at Marin. A wagon pushed through the crowd. Ephraim Pike sat in the driver's seat, his face like a thundercloud. Sheriff Brogan rode beside him, his hand on his pistol. Pike had come to see his victory. What is the meaning of this? Hale, Pike demanded. Why is my equipment in a swamp? And who are these people? Sheriff, clear this rabble out. Not until they hear this. Reverend Cole's voice shook, but it was powerful. He was standing on a wagon bed, and in his hand, he held Brogan's black ledger. This is the law, Mr. Pike. The real law. That is stolen property, Brogan yelled, his face turning purple. Then it is a property you should have guarded better, Cole shouted back, and he opened the book. May 4th, $10 from Jory Hale for lost horse. May 7th, $50 from Cinder and Pike Railroad for land survey fees. May 10th, $100 from Ephraim Pike for community relations. May 12th, $200 for the false arrest of the girl. He read the entries, one by one. His voice echoed in the stunned silence. The townspeople were not just hearing words. They were hearing the price of their own fear, the cost of their silence. They were hearing how they had been bought, sold, and used. The settler who had been standing next to Brogan, a man whose ranch was just down the road, looked at the sheriff. His face was hard with a new, cold anger. He spat in the dust at Brogan's feet. One by one, the townspeople, the rabble, turned their backs on the sheriff. It was not a violent act. It was a quiet, total, and final judgment. Brogan saw it. He was a man who lived on fear, and he was no longer feared. He was a puppet, and his strings had been cut. He looked at Pike, at the angry crowd, at the captured ledger. He was finished. He slowly, carefully, turned his horse. He thought he could slip away in the confusion, back up the trail, back to the canyon. He was a survivor, if nothing else. He rounded the first bend, out of sight of the crowd. His horse snorted and reared, throwing him. Ashki was standing in the middle of the trail. He was not a warrior. He was a ghost. He was pale as death, his shirt soaked in new blood, his left arm in a crude sling. But he was standing, and in his one good hand, he held the end of a rope, tied thick and heavy across the path, the trap he had taught her. Brogan scrambled in the dust, reaching for his pistol. Ashki, moving with a pained, slow grace, stepped on his wrist. He did not say a word. He simply bent, picked up Brogan's gun, and used his own rope to tie the sheriff's hands. His face was a mask of cold justice. Back at the spring, Jory Hale was trapped, The crowd had turned. His boss was watching. His gunmen were useless. He looked at Marin, his face twisting. If he was going down, he would take her with him. "You!" he snarled, and he took a step back, raising his pistol one last time. His foot came down on one of the rocks Shadi had oiled. His feet shot out from under him. He had no time to yell. He just went backward off the high boulder. He fell, a heavy, limp weight, and crashed onto the pile of sharp rocks below. It was not a long fall, but it was a hard one. A sickening snap echoed in the quiet. He was not dead. He lay in a heap, his leg bent at an angle that was not human. His gun was 10 feet away. It was over. Ephraim Pike looked at the scene. His foreman was crippled. His sheriff was gone. His equipment was sinking in a mud pit. His gunmen were vanishing, fading back into the rocks now that the fight was lost. And the entire town, his foundation of power, was staring at him with cold, dead eyes. He was a man of business. He knew a total loss when he saw one. He turned his immaculate horse. His face was impassive, carved from stone. "This action," he said, his voice clear and cold, "is a gross violation of a legal claim filed with the county. You will all be hearing from our lawyers." He rode away. He did not look back. No one watched him go. A long, heavy silence fell over the valley. The battle was won. Shadi was the first to move. She walked past the broken equipment, past the defeated men. She went to the edge of the blue spring, which was muddy and torn, but still bubbling from the earth. She took her small pouch of yellow corn pollen. She held it to the sky. She scattered it to the 4 directions. She was thanking the land, thanking the water, thanking the hozo that had, in the end, been restored. The crowd, both dine and settler, watched in silence. They did not understand the ritual, but they understood the reverence. They kept their distance. After a long moment, one of the settlers, a rancher named Cobb, walked over to the diversion ditch. He picked up one of the abandoned shovels. He looked at one of Shadi's men, a young dine man he had seen at the market. He did not speak. He just nodded. The dine man picked up a pickaxe. Side by side, they began the slow, hard work of filling the ditch, of undoing the damage. Another man climbed onto the nearest cinder and pike wagon. He tore down the small company flag, a red C and P, and threw it into the mud. The adrenaline that had held Marin upright, that had given her a name, vanished. Her knees buckled. She suddenly felt the cold, the exhaustion, the terror of the last 2 days. She turned, her eyes scanning the crowd. She needed to see him. He was there, leaning against the rock wall where he had trapped Brogan. His one good hand was pressed to his shoulder, but the blood was streaming between his fingers. He was shaking, his body finally succumbing to the fever and the wound. She ran to him, stumbling over the rocks. She did not care about the crowd, or the mud, or the men. She reached him just as his legs gave out. She caught him, her small frame taking his full weight. He was heavy, and he was collapsing. "You came," she whispered, her voice choking, her arms locking around him. I told you to rest." He looked at her, his eyes bright with fever but full of a profound, unshakable love. A small, pained smile touched his lips. "I am a partner," he gasped. He was heavy in her arms, but she held him. She held him, and together they watched their 2 worlds, their 2 peoples, begin the work of healing. She held him. He was a dead weight of fever and blood loss, his life slipping through her fingers. The battle was won. The valley was quiet. But this fight, the silent one, had just begun. "Shadi," Marin gasped, her voice raw. "We must move him." The crowd, settlers and dine, parted. They saw the warrior, their defender, collapsing. They saw the girl, their leader, holding him up. Shadi took charge. "Not the town," the old woman commanded. "My Hogan, it is warm. It is safe." They made a litter, 2 men from the settlement and 2 dine, and carried him. It was a slow, agonizing procession. Marin walked beside him, her hand never leaving his good arm, her eyes fixed on his face. He was pale, his lips gray, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. For 3 days, the fever raged. Marin did not leave his side. She was no longer a general. She was a nurse, a vigil. She spooned water and Shadi's bitter herbal broth between his cracked lips. She changed the bandages Maitran had sent, the new cloth a stark white against his copper skin. She sat in the dim, smoky light of the hogan, her mind empty of everything but the sound of his breathing. She learned the rhythm of it, the shallow breaths of pain, the long, slow rattle of the fever. She learned the shape of his face in the dark. She held his good hand when he thrashed, whispering, though she did not know what to say, "You are not alone. I am here. You are mine. I am here." Outside the hogan, the world was being remade. Ephraim Pike had, as promised, sent his lawyers. They arrived from Santa Fe on a private carriage, smelling of expensive cigars and Eastern law. They filed papers with the county, demanding the immediate arrest of the saboteurs, the return of their stolen equipment, and the enforcement of their legal claim. But they had not counted on Judge Elias Thorne. He was a new appointee from Washington, a man sent by the territorial governor to investigate the rumors of corruption and railroad overreach that were making the territory look unstable. He arrived not in a carriage, but on a dusty mule, with 2 armed federal marshals. He was a thin, gray man with eyes that saw everything. He did not go to the Cinder and Pike camp. He went to the ruins of Maitran's warehouse. He listened, in silence, as May, her face still smudged with soot, told him what had happened. He listened as Reverend Cole presented the black ledger, his hand shaking. "This was stolen, Your Honor." The Cinder and Pike lawyer protested, his face red. "It is inadmissible." "It is evidence, sir," Judge Thorne said, his voice as dry as the dust on his boots. "And I will admit it." He held court not in the sheriff's office, but in the open air, in the center of town. He called the ranchers, the ones who had fought beside the Dine. He called the townspeople, the ones who had watched in fear, and then he called for the girl. Marin came. She left Ashki's side for the first time, her heart torn. She stood before the judge, in her soot-stained boy's clothes, her hair matted. "Tell me," the judge said, "from the beginning." She told him. She told him about the dust, the hunger, the broken amulet. She told him about the market, the fire, the arrest. She told him about the map, the chase on the roof, the gunshots. She told him about Shadi's capture and the battle at the spring. She did not raise her voice. She did not weep. She just told the truth. When she was finished, the judge was silent for a full minute. He looked at the railroad lawyers. "Your claim," he said, "is based on a document signed by one Hasty and Yazi, representing the Dine people." "That is correct, Your Honor, a legal and binding—" "This court finds that Hasty and Yazi," the judge interrupted, "was a known outcast, plied with liquor, and paid $200 for his thumbprint. The claim is fraudulent. It is null and void." A gasp went up from the crowd. "Furthermore," the judge continued, his voice rising, "this court finds the Cinder and Pike Railroad guilty of conspiracy, bribery of a public official, attempted murder, and the unlawful destruction of private property." He turned to his marshals. "You will arrest Sheriff Brogan, who is currently tied up in his own jail. You will arrest Jory Hale, who is being treated for a broken leg. They will stand trial for their crimes." He looked at the lawyers. "Cinder and Pike will pay a fine of $50,000 to the United States government, and they will pay, in full, for the reconstruction of Maitran's mercantile and warehouse. They will also pay $10,000 in damages to the Dean people for the desecration of their land. You will have your equipment out of this valley by nightfall. Good day. Gentlemen." "Justice," late but sure, had arrived. The town, leaderless and shaken, needed to heal. Reverend Cole, his faith in his community restored, called a meeting. It was held in the open air a week later. The air was cleaner. May's new lumber was already stacked, the sound of hammers replacing the sound of gunfire. Ashki was there. He was pale, his arm in a clean sling, but he was standing. He stood beside Marin. Reverend Cole recounted the events, but he did not speak of shame. He spoke of courage. He spoke of May's resilience, of Shadi's wisdom, and of Marin's leadership. "We were a town divided," he said, his voice carrying to the ranchers and the dying who stood together in the crowd. "We were afraid. We built walls of dust and prejudice. But the wall has come down. Now, we must build a future." A rancher, the man named Cobb, stepped forward. "The water," he said, his voice rough. "It was always about the water. It ain't just theirs." He nodded to the dying. "And it ain't just ours. It is the valley's." Shadi spoke. "The spring is the mother. She feeds all her children. She does not ask their tribe." And so, the Blue Spring Water Council was formed. 3 ranchers and 3 dine, including Ashki. They would write the rules. The water would be shared. The spring itself was declared a protected zone. No industry, no mining, no railroad. It was to be left in peace. The public healing was done. The private one was next. That evening, Marin went to the Hogan. Ashki was there, sitting by the fire, his strength returning. Shadi sat across from him, quiet. "It is time," Shadi said. Marin nodded. She had been waiting for this. She had her name. She had her future. But her past was still a broken thing she carried at her neck. "You have found your path, Marin Coalfield," Shadi said, her voice soft. "But you must know your beginning." The old woman reached into a leather pouch, one she had worn for more than 15 winters. "The woman who came to us, Sarah, your mother, she was brave. She was running from a cruel husband. She found peace here, for a time. She made this." Shadi held out a small blanket fragment, the one with the blue cross-stitch from the newspaper. "She made it for you." "When the raiders came," Shadi continued, her voice heavy with memory, "she hid you in the rocks. She gave you your amulet, and she gave me this. She said, 'If they find me, keep this for her. It is the other half.' She did not survive the raid. We searched for you, but you were gone, lost." Shadi opened her other hand. In it lay a piece of turquoise, carved and broken. It was the other half of Marin's amulet. Marin's hands were trembling. She took the piece. It was cool to the touch. She pulled her own amulet from beneath her shirt, the piece she had rubbed for 19 years, the sharp, broken edge that had been her only comfort. She held the 2 pieces together. They clicked. A perfect, seamless fit. The spiral was complete. She was not just a survivor. She was not an accident. She was the daughter of Sarah Coalfield. She was Marin. She was whole. Tears she had not known she possessed streamed down her face, not for the mother she had lost, but for the self she had finally, truly found. The next day, the town gathered again. This was not a meeting of law or politics. It was a celebration. Marin and Ashki walked into the center of the crowd, side by side. He was in a clean linen shirt, his black hair tied back. She wore a simple blue dress, a gift from May, the color of the spring. They stood before Shadi, who waited for them by the town's new-dug well. The crowd, dine and settler, watched. They understood. This was the final treaty. There was no preacher, no book. It was the simple ceremony they had promised each other. In the dark, in the cleft of the rock, it was a choice, made public. Shadi took a single strand of Marin's hair, the color of corn silk, and a single strand of Ashki's, the color of a raven's wing. She bound them together with a clean yucca fiber. "You are 2, she said, her voice for all to hear. "You have walked 2 paths. Now, you are 1. You walk 1 path. You choose this. You are bound. She handed Ashki a single, perfect blue kernel of corn. This is for the earth which feeds you. She handed Marin a kernel. This is for the future, which you will grow together. He looked at her. She looked at him. It was done. Marin turned to the crowd. She was Marin Coalfield, the woman who had been lost. But she was something new, too. She looked at Ashki, her husband. She looked at Shadi, her new family. I am Marin Coalfield, she said, her voice clear and strong. And I am Marin Ashki. 2 names, 2 communities, 1 life. She stood there, her husband's good hand in hers. She understood. Finally, belonging was not a thing you were given. It was not a piece of stone or a name on a piece of paper. It was a choice. It was a choice you made every day, to stand, to fight, to love, and to build. The sun began to set, casting a long, warm light over the valley. At the edge of the creek, where the pure water from Blue Spring now ran clear, the children were playing. Dine children and settler children, splashing in the shallows, their laughter mixing together. The wind was calm. The red dust, that symbol of a long and brutal drought, had finally settled. It lay across the mesas like a soft, summer blanket. 1 year, that is what it took for the land to heal. The rains came, good and strong, washing the last of the red dust from the air. The valley, which had been scorched by drought and fear, was now a tapestry of green. The corn in Shadi's field stood 7 feet tall, the stalks thick and heavy with ears. The spring, Blue Spring, ran clear and full, its water no longer a thing to be fought for, but a thing to be shared. In the center of Red Butte, life had found a new, quieter rhythm. The Silver Spur Saloon was still loud, but the railroad men, the long coats, the arrogant surveyors, were gone. In their place were ranchers, prospectors, and dine traders, conducting their business in a town that had learned, the hard way, to respect the truth. Nailed to the front of the United States Post Office, right next to the schedule for the stagecoach, was a new, hand-painted sign. It was framed in solid oak. At the top, it read, "The Blue Spring Water Compact." Below, the rules were written out, simple and clear, in 2 languages, first in English and then in the flowing, precise characters of the Dane. It was a promise, set in wood, for all to see. Maytran's mercantile and warehouse was larger than before. The town, in an act of communal penance, had helped her rebuild. It was the heart of the town, stocked with flour, bullets, and brightly colored cloth. And in a cradle behind the counter, a small, dark-haired baby boy slept, his face a perfect blend of 2 worlds. May, his godmother, watched him with an eye as sharp and protective as any mother's. Reverend Cole had found his true calling. He still preached on Sundays, but his real work was in the afternoons. In the small chapel, he taught reading and writing. His students were a mix of settler children, their faces scrubbed clean, and dine children, their eyes bright and curious. They learned their letters together, sharing slates, sounding out the words from the same worn copy of The Pilgrim's Progress. Shadi, her place as the valley's matriarch secure, had also become a teacher. In the evenings, she sat by her fire, and the children, both dine and settler, would gather. She did not teach them letters. She told them stories. She told them of the long walk, of the hardship, but she also told them of the battle at the spring. She told them of fire and water, of how a brave girl had no name, and how a brave warrior had a wounded shoulder, and how, together, they had taught a town the meaning of harmony. And on the banks of the spring itself, just a mile up from the town, was a new home. It was not a lean-to, and not quite a hogan. It was a small, solid cabin, built of cottonwood and stone, its back to the mesa, its face to the rising sun. A horse corral, neat and strong, held 6 good mares. This was the home of Marin and Ashki. They had built it together. He, his arm now strong, had cut the wood. She had chinked the logs with mud and straw. It was their horse camp, the beginning of their life. One afternoon, Marin stood at the fence, her son held safe in a cradleboard on her back, watching Ashki. He was in the corral with a young, unbroken mare, a beautiful animal the color of new honey. He was not using a rope, not using a bit. He was just moving, a dance of patience. He moved. The horse moved. He stopped. She stopped. It was a conversation of pure trust. He was healing the horse, just as this land had healed him. The sound of the stagecoach, pulling into town, was a faint rumble. An hour later, May walked up the path, holding a letter. "It is official," May said, her voice dry, but her eyes shining. She handed the letter to Marin. It was from Santa Fe, from Judge Thorne's office. It was the last legal thread. Cinder and Pike, facing a federal investigation and a market panic, had withdrawn all its lawsuits. Their claim on the valley was officially, and forever, dead. "And this," May said, handing over a second, smaller letter, from the warden at the territorial prison. Marin opened it. It was short. Sheriff Brogan was serving 15 years for corruption and attempted murder. Jory Hale, his leg healed but his spirit broken, was serving 10 years for arson and assault. Ephraim Pike, the man in the dark suit, had vanished. He had taken a steamship east, his reputation in ruins, and was never heard from again. "It is over," Marin whispered. She looked at the paper, the final, legal stamp on their new life. "Yes," May said. She smiled, a rare, full smile. "Justice. It is not just what a judge says in a courtroom. It is this." She looked at the green corn in the valley. "It is a community that tells the truth. It is people who share the water." She reached over and gently touched the sleeping baby's cheek. "It is this." May left, and Marin walked back to the cabin. The sun was getting low, painting the mesas in shades of fire and rose. She took the small object from her pocket, the amulet, her mother's and hers, the two halves, mended. A local Dine silversmith had bound them together with a thin, strong band of silver, so the crack was just a scar, a memory. She stood on a small stool and hung the mended amulet over the frame of their doorway. A blessing, a guardian, a reminder of who she was and where she had come from. She felt his presence before she heard him. Ashki had finished with the mare and had come up behind her. He did not put his arms around her. He just stood close, his good shoulder brushing her arm. They stood together, looking at the stone. "It is whole," she said, her voice quiet. "Like you," he said. She smiled, a small, private smile. She leaned her head back against his chest. "I have my mother's name, and your name." He was quiet for a long time, watching the sun disappear. The first stars were appearing in the purple sky. "The name," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The one you chose, Marin, that is for the world. It is a good name. It tells them who you are." He reached up with his good hand, his fingers tracing the outline of the silver-bound stone. "But your heart," he whispered, his lips brushing her hair. "That we hold together." She closed her eyes, her hand finding his, their fingers lacing. This was the truth of the West. It was not a land of wild freedom, of taking what you wanted. It was a land of brutal, beautiful responsibility. It was the responsibility to the earth, to the water that gave life. It was the responsibility to the people you chose, the family you built. It was the hard, daily, glorious work of holding a heart in trust. Far below, the lights of Red Butte began to flicker on. The water in the spring, the source, the mother, flowed silently in the cool night air, a timeless current. On the new-cut fence post at the edge of their land, Two sets of names were carved deep into the wood. Ashki Nez, Maran Ashki, a line drawn, a belonging claimed. The wildness was still there, in the cry of a hawk, in the cold of the winter wind. But in the valley, there was peace. It was a guarded peace, a realistic one, bought with blood and courage, but it was theirs. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like, and support us by hitting that hype button. It helps more than you know, and allows these stories to be heard by so many more.